Hey everyone, I've got a nice, simple one-point perspective street scene to show you guys today. So let's get started here. Like usual, I'm just gonna spray a little bit just to get it damp. Spray the other side too. Now the greens in this picture that I'm using as a reference are just so bright and vibrant. So I want to try to capture that if I can. So I'm just going to start mixing some of that color while the paper dries up a little bit here. I'm going to use a lot of yellow. This is lemon yellow, I think. And then cobalt turquoise. Find that combination gives you a really nice looking, bright, vibrant yellow. And I'll mix some other colors in there as needed. But that'll be a good base. I'm just going to drop in a pretty run-of-the-mill sky. I want the color to be a little more pure than that, so I'm just cleaning off a little space on the palette. Cerulean blue, cobalt blue. Those are the two colors I usually mix together for my skies, and I'll also throw in some cobalt turquoise. Skies are surprisingly complex, even simple skies like this one. There's a lot of messing around with different blues to get the right shade to make it look realistic or convincing. So just start at the top. I'm going to try not to color in the trunk of this tree if I can avoid it, since it is very bright in the reference photo. I want to preserve that highlight on the trunk. But I only need to worry about the right side of or the left side of the trunk because the sun is hitting it on the left side. And I'm just painting right through all these areas where trees are going to be covering up. Because you want to be able to see little hints of sky through the trees. You don't want it to be just a solid mass of leaves. Because trees in nature don't usually look that way. Then dropping down towards the horizon, I'll just throw in some random warm color. And then just bring that back up. And that'll create a really smooth gradient. It's really that easy to do. Watercolor is perfect for creating these nice gradients. And while we're at it, we're just gonna drop in the color of the road. This is the first of hopefully only 3 washes. I try to limit myself to 3 washes if I can avoid it. Or I should say, I try to avoid more than 3 washes. Because more than 3 washes, things start to look muddy and you lose the vibrancy of the watercolor. So I'm just dropping in a warm gray color for the road as kind of a baseline color. start dropping in some of these greens. Yeah, see how vibrant and bright that looks? Painting realistic looking greens was something I had just the hardest time with. It took a lot of practice to be able to get greens that looked convincing and not fake. So I'm dropping in what would be considered the second wash for the background green trees, the background color of these trees, because I want the background to have more soft edges than the foreground will have, and that'll help give a sense of depth and push these trees into the background. And while it's still wet, I'm going to add in some darks just to give these a little more sense of volume, but I'm only going to do that for these closer trees. And as things go back, the detail gets less and less sharp. And we'll go back in later and add some even darker colors into here. Unless I do it now. I think I'm just going to do it now. And that way we can preserve those soft wet into wet effects. Yeah, we don't really need to worry too much about the trees on the left side because those are not the focus of the painting. So let's finish the first wash here. The sidewalk is just going to be the same color as the street, just a warm gray. And we'll come back and drop in the greens. I want these greens that are in the foreground to be super, super vibrant. Yeah, I'm liking the way that looks. This is a picture that I took up in Cedar City, Utah, which is in southwestern Utah. I'm visiting a friend up there. It's a pretty cool little town. It's not something that's really on anybody's radar, like, hey, let's go to Cedar City. But it's a nice town, I gotta say. If you've ever been to Prescott, Arizona, it's got a similar vibe to that. Now there are some shadows on the grass that I want to get in now while it's still damp. I would usually wait till everything was dry to do this, but I want these shadows to be a little softer than they would be if I were to paint wet onto dry. So Just keep that in mind. If you want soft shadows, then wet into wet is your friend. Paint the shadows while things are still damp. You gotta be careful though. You gotta make sure that when you're mixing your paint, you have more pigment than water. Otherwise, you'll get these things called cauliflower edges, which are really obnoxious and don't look good at all. So, if you want to avoid those cauliflower edges, doing wet onto wet, make sure you have more pigment in your mixture than water. I'm just going to darken up these shadows in the foreground a little bit more, just to bring them forward more than they were. Okay, now let's finish off this first wash. Trying to finish this painting fairly quickly because to get good audio, I like to record with no air conditioning running. But it's Phoenix in the middle of June, which means right now at 8:30 at night it is 105 degrees outside. So I'm trying to finish this before it gets too unbearably hot in this here apartment. It's worth it to get good audio. That's a little too blue, so I'm going to add some more yellow into it. Yeah, there you go. That's what I wanted. Now there is a, I don't know what kind of tree it is. Is it a plum tree? Some kind of plum tree. Those trees that have the reddish purple leaves, there's one of those right here. So I'm trying to keep that in mind. I want to leave space to drop that in. Not too worried about showing any detail, just dropping in color to show that there's green stuff over here. It's really all you need. Just indications, as Bob Ross would say, just little indications. Let's get that plum color dropped in. So I'm going to start with this super strong pigment that I use sometimes, but I only use it for things like this, and I'll put it in skies. I really should know, but I don't remember what pigment this is. I think it's violet. It looks like grape juice or wine. It's a really nice color. But like I said, the pigment is super strong. So just a teeny bit is all you really need. And I'm adding in some other red warm colors, trying to get close to what's in the photo. It's something like that. Yeah. It's kind of a purple, reddish, grape, wine, something. Plum, if you will. It's a really interesting color for a tree. I wonder why evolution decided, yeah, this tree needs to be purple when all the other trees are green. I don't know why this leaves the leaves of this tree are this color. It's a mystery to me. So if anybody knows why that is, feel free to tell me. So I'm very curious. I am somewhat of a plant aficionado. It's one of my many, maybe too many hobbies, interests. I have a bunch of house plants. I got plants out on the patio. Keeping plants alive in an Arizona summer is a whole crazy skill set that you have to develop. I've got some bonsai trees that I'm training. It'll be years and years before they actually look like bonsai trees, but that's just the process. Some of them are starting to get nice thick trunks, which is super exciting. I really love the color of this tree, and I'm realizing as I'm painting this that this is going to be one of the focal points, which I wasn't planning on. I was planning on the car being the focal point, and I think these two things, the car and this tree, are going to be the main pieces of this painting. Unexpected. Always keep your mind open to what the painting is trying to tell you. Because as you go, the painting will tell you exactly what it needs to look good. Almost as if it's talking to you, and you just got to learn how to listen to it. It sounds super woo-woo and hippy-dippy, but it's really, really true. The painting will tell you exactly what it needs to be finished. You just, like I said, got to learn to listen to it. And be willing to change your plan as you go. And I'm adding in the shadow parts of this tree while it's still wet. Again, this is called wet into wet. Yeah, something like that. I think that'll do it. Now there's a bunch of really bright yellow leaves over here that actually go in front of this tree. So I think I'm going to have to use gouache at the very last step to put those bright green leaves over this, because you can't paint light over dark with regular watercolor. It's too transparent. So I'm going to save that step for last. Painting all these leaves in the foreground, which is totally fine. That's why gouache is great, because you can do stuff like that and it works. So I need to add some pigment to the trunk of this tree. My go-to colors for wood, it's actually a really similar color to the sidewalk. It's kind of a gray, cobalt blue, burnt sienna, I think is what this is. Or is this burnt sienna? I don't know. It's a reddish brown color, and that usually gives you a nice woody color. Okay. So, I would say the first wash is now done. So we're going to start the second wash. There are some really cool shadows that cross the road and that go up onto the grass and then cross the sidewalk. So that's going to be what I'm putting in now. using these quick brush strokes with a relatively dry mixture over paper that has a little bit of texture to it. And that gives me what's called a dry brush effect. Which gives you basically automatic texture without having to do very much at all. And, you know, it gives the impression of kind of dappled shadows, light shining through leaves. And I'm going to darken up the lip of this gutter. Just darkening up some of the shadows on the grass that I already had in there, just to make this more cohesive. And then these all go across the sidewalk like that. Yeah. So we'll connect this first part of the middle value shape right up to the car. And as always, I'm leaving out those areas that I want to keep as highlights. So I'm having to be pretty careful and deliberate with where I put my brush during this particular step. But I'm also still trying to stay loose and expressive if I can, because I'm not going too overboard with the detail of this car. Yeah, I'm liking how that's looking. And now we'll drop in that shadow that goes underneath the car, up onto the grass, over to the tree, and over here. So the shadow comes out from this wheel. It needs to be darker. Yeah, that's better. And then up onto the grass. Onto the tree. Out to there. Now that's where the shadow of the car looks like it stops. It's right there. And the rest of the shadow comes from the trunk of this tree, which goes out something like that. And then that actually goes vertical onto these bushes. It's really cool to me how the way shadows fall across things can give you a really good idea of the kind of shape that the thing has even before there's any shading going on. That is a really interesting shadow. I didn't even realize how interesting it was until I started painting it just now. And with that, let's keep painting the shadow up the right side of the trunk. Man, I wish we could have big trees like this here in Phoenix. I say it all the time, but I just love huge trees like this. There's something about it. Now, as the shadow comes around to the light side of the trunk, you'll notice I'm actually dropping in some texture in that transition area to show the texture of this really big, thick, rough bark that this tree has. So in a way, it is a soft edge. It's just kind of a different technique than I usually use to get a soft edge. It's like it's a soft, rough edge. And while it's still wet, I'm gonna go back into the farthest side of the tree that's in the farthest side of the trunk that's in shadow and darken it up just a little more to give it even more sense of volume. Yeah, even darker than that actually. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's looking real nice. I'm really liking the way this is turning out. Just drop in a little bit of texture on these bushes here. Not too much, because they're actually being directly lit from the sun, so there's not too much volume that you'd be able to see. Now, connecting this part of the shadow to all this stuff in the background. Because the bushes back here are all in shadow. And again, painting around the areas that I want to keep as my highlights. There's another big shadow that comes across the road right here. So we'll drop that in right now. It comes across right about there. I'm trying not to ruin my highlights on this car. Continues over here. And then we'll darken up some of these trees over here just a little bit too. Just in a few spots to indicate a little more volume and texture than it had. darkest shadows on, or I should say darker shadows than there were on this purple tree. I really want to know what kind of tree this is. I'll have to look it up after. So this will be connected right here, this trunk, and that'll go right up into the tree. And you see that now that this is dry, the edges are razor sharp. This is now wet onto dry. And I can go back in with a clean, damp brush and just get rid of a few of these harder edges as I see fit. I'm going to keep some of them because I like that jaggedy, blocky, kind of impressionistic look. Because I would say I'm a realist painter, but with an impressionistic flair to what I do. It makes it a little more dream-like. And there's some other shadows way back in the distance that cross the road that I'm going to put in right now. I'm going to drop in this tree trunk, which is all in shadow. Darken up the closest of the trees in the background just a little more. Again, this will force the stuff behind it to the background. Okay. Let's see, so now we can move on to the third wash, which is going to be the darks. I'm going to use these pretty sparingly, just where it needs it. That's a whole skill in itself, is deciding where does it need it. So I will show you these tires. A few details on the shadow side of the car. The window. Gonna leave that little glint on there. And that's it for the car. I'm gonna leave the car alone. the shadow side of this trunk again. And you can see as I'm adding in this darkest layer of paint how everything just pops right off the paper. It's one of my favorite steps. Is adding in this is kind of the payoff. Because the first wash, and even during the second wash, things don't really look that good. And it can be easy to get discouraged and think, oh, this painting is gonna suck. I should just quit while I'm ahead. That's a trap that I still fall into to this day. But you just have to trust the process. Follow the steps, finish your washes, and then you can decide if the painting sucks or not. But you have to finish it before you can make that call. So just keep putting pigment down, keep painting, and it'll get there. And if it really doesn't look good still, then, well, figure out why and paint it again. That's how you learn. The sooner you can wrap your head around the fact that some of your paintings are just going to not work, then the easier time you're going to have doing this. That is something I still work on that to this day. I'm just going to add some like cracks and a few lines in that road, just a few. And I'm gonna drop in some branches for this tree that I will be painting with gouache. And this will give me kind of a template for where to put the leaves. Okay, I think that about does it for the darks. There's not that much. It's a pretty simple scene. And this is one of those scenes that how many times a day do we all drive down the road and see things that look exactly like this? And we don't even notice it. But since I always have my head on a swivel looking for what am I going to paint next, these kinds of scenes just jump right out to me. So it's the most mundane thing in the world. It's a suburban neighborhood street with trees and a car, but it can still become a beautiful painting. Because all you're really looking for a good reference photo is good contrast between light and shadow, warm, cool, and then the shape, the big middle value shape that we always talk about. This has a pretty complex middle value shape, but it's still readable. If you squint your eyes, you can see it's all this comes down to here, and then it comes down to here. So it's kind of like a meandering shape that works its way up the painting like that. At first I would have to intentionally go out and look for reference photos, and I still do that sometimes, but usually I'll just see stuff when I'm out and about driving or walking around, and I'm not even consciously thinking about looking for reference photos for painting, but I've done it so much that it's instinctual at this point, and these scenes just pop out to me, and I'm like, oh, there's a painting right there. And it happens all the time. Makes it a lot easier, that's for sure. Okay, so now we're gonna see if we can make this work. I'm not really used to using gouache in this way. Most of the time I just use it for pure white highlights at the very end if it needs any. So this will be an interesting experiment that you all will see in real time. So I've got my green color mixed up, and I'm gonna mix a little gouache into it. The thing with gouache is you can actually turn regular watercolor pigments into gouache by mixing pure white into it. But it's hard because as you do that, you see it becomes white and milky. So it can be a little tricky to get vibrant pigments with mixing white gouache into watercolor, but you can do it. Just takes a little practice, which I have not done a lot of with this, but I guess I can count this, what I'm doing right now, as practice, right? So that actually looks pretty good. Let's see, so I'm not gonna go too crazy. Yeah, see? And it lets you paint light over dark. It's like magic. I would at some point love to get into painting with just gouache, because it's a fascinating medium and it's not very common anymore. And there's some just stunning effects that you can get with it that you really can't get with anything else. It's very unique in the way it looks and the way it acts, because it's still a water-based medium, but it's opaque. So in that way, it's more like acrylic, in that you can't see through it. So let's see if we can get some darks into this part of the tree. Yep. There you go. So I'm just looking at this scene, I'm squinting my eyes and making sure I like the way it looks. And ladies and gentlemen, I am going to call that a finished painting. I hope you enjoyed the video. I certainly enjoyed painting this scene. It was very simple and nice. It's always good to go back to basic things every once in a while. So there you have it. A nice simple street scene. If you'd like to see more, feel free to stick around, because I've got plenty more to show you. If you stuck around for the whole video, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you got something out of it, and I will see you on the next one.